After completing my 10th class exams in 1979, my father suggested that I go and help my father's uncle and learn astrology. Mathematics being my favorite subject, I learned the calculations. My grandfather taught me how to calculate the inclinations of each planet and how to calculate the Lagna and the meridian center MC. And he gave me some birth charts to draw. Thus, I learned how to draw the birth charts first and showed interest in predictions. So my grandfather told me some predictions, some of the tips that he usually uses for predictions, and after learning those tips I documented some of them. I verified with my father. While my father and my grandfather have laid the foundation for me to get interested in astrology, for almost a decade or 2 decades, I didn't show any interest. Welcome to Sastry Karra's Astrological series. This is a presentation about Steve Hawkings, one of the famous scientists in United Kingdom. And in this presentation is divided into three parts. In the first part, I'm going to talk about the D1 chart, the Rashi chart from perspective of the planets, the Nakshatra, and then the Lagna-Adhipathi in the D1 chart, and the Mahadasa of the planet at the time of birth. That's the first part where I'll do a detailed analysis of it. In the second part, what I'm going to do is to take some of the major life events as per the Wikipedia, and then what I'm going to do is that using Bihurugu Chakra Paddhati and Bihurugu Sarla Paddhati, Vimsottari Dasa, and the other Dasa systems that I am aware of, I'm going to consider all those things and then explain the astrological justification for that particular event to happen. In the final part, the third part, I'm going to consider only two major events in his life: marriage, getting the sick at the age of 23 or 24, something like that. That's the first one. Second one is a marriage, and the third one is death. So I'm taking these three major events in his life and going into detail as possible, explaining you from an astrological perspective why did that event happen. I hope you will like this presentation too. Thank you very much. Let's now start looking at the D1 chart for this particular native. The Lagna is Taurus, and so the Lagna-Adhipathi is Venus. Remember, the first and the sixth house lord is Venus, and Venus is residing in the ninth house, the Dharmasthanamu of, and in the Dharmasthana-Adhipathi is Saturn. So what is important here is to see how is the sixth, since Venus is the sixth house lord and the first house lord, we got to be very careful when you are looking at this particular native, because the sixth house deals with Rogasthanamo, and the Rogasthana-Adhipathi is residing in the malefic house, in ninth house, owned by a malefic Saturn. And then go back and see where is this malefic Saturn residing. Malefic Saturn is residing in the 12th house, which is the place of cure or hospitalizations, and it is co-joined again with the 12th house lord Mars, and from 12th house the direct aspect is on the 6th house. So that means the 6th house lord Venus is residing in the house owned by Saturn. Saturn and Mars are residing in the 12th house and having a direct aspect on the 6th house. So you can clear, and the 6th house lord Venus is also the first house lord. So you can clearly see that this particular native has for the whole lifetime will be having some sort of a deep bondage between the first house, that is the Tanusthanamu, the sixth house, the Rogastanamu, the ninth house, the Dharmasthanamu, and the 12th house, place of cure or hospitals. So this itself will tell you that there is something wrong here for this particular native when it comes to the native's health. And now the next thing you have to look at it is, who is the 8th house lord? The 8th house is the house of death. The 8th house lord is Jupiter, and see where it is. Jupiter is residing in the first house, having a direct aspect on the 7th house. 7th house is Marakasthanamu. So the 8th house lord is residing in Tanusthanamu and having a direct aspect on Marakasthanamu. This will tell you that this particular native will have quite a number of times have death related situations for this particular native, and that particular death related situations, you can ask, when does this really happen? It happens when you have to look every time in the transit analysis, and that's the place where you can see whenever the malefic Saturn enters what is this house called? This is called the Libra and Scorpio. Whenever the malefic Saturn enters the 7th house Scorpio or the 8th house Sagittarius, or whenever the 12th house lord Mars enters the 7th house, which is its own house. Mars is also the lord of the 7th house. So the 12th house lord is the Marakasthana-Adhipathi. So whenever the transit Mars enters the 7th house or the 8th house, there is a possibility for this particular native to have some sort of a medical disturbances, health related disturbances, resulting into either hospitalization or a threat to his life, something similar to that. And the most important thing I want to say here is that from the 8th house, Sun is residing in the 8th house, who is the 4th house lord, and from 8th house, Sun is having a direct aspect on the 2nd house. 2nd house is another, again, Marakasthanamu. So Sun residing in the 8th house got functional malefic, and now that functional malefic Sun is having a direct aspect on Marakasthanamu. So Sun, you know that Sun stays for almost like 30 to 45 days in each Rashi. So whenever Sun touches Sagittarius, the 8th house, or Taurus Gemini, which is the 2nd house, then again this native will have some sort of a medical health related issues. Overall, you can clear here from a high level, you can clearly say that this particular native is sure to have a number of health related issues for during his or her whole lifetime.
Welcome to Sastry Karra's Astrological series. Here in this presentation, I'm going to explain more in detail about Steve Hawkins' birth chart. I explained you the D1 chart at a high level. Let me go and explain to you about the D1 chart, and specifically keeping in mind at the house who owns the house and where is the house lord residing in the D1 chart. So let's start with the first house. The first house is Lagna-Adhipathi or Tanusthanamu. Is the Lagna-Adhipathi is Venus. Venus is residing in the 9th house. And then the second house lord is from 9th house. If you look at it, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Okay, from 9th house, it has a direct aspect on the 3rd house. That's fine. And then the second one is, the second house lord is Mercury. Mercury is being the 2nd house lord. We can assume, 2nd house being the Marakasthanamu, we can assume that Mercury is now becomes a functional malefic because it's the Marakasthana-Adhipathi. And remember, Mercury deals with the speech and communications. That's the core character of Mercury, speech and communications. And now is the 2nd house lord. And 2nd house lord also deals with the speech sometimes. So Mercury, where is Mercury residing? Mercury is residing in the 9th house. 9th house is the place where the Lagna-Adhipathi Venus is residing. At this point, the Lagna-Adhipathi and the 2nd Marakasthana-Adhipathi Mercury, they both are residing in the 9th house. Let's just stay there. The third house lord is moon. Moon is in the 5th house, that's fine. And the 4th house lord is sun. 4th house is Matrasthanamo and basic education. And basic education, whoever is the lord who is supposed to give the basic education is in the 8th house. So the basic education, when you look at the basic education part of it, it tells you that the particular native will get the basic education. 8th house deals with the secrets, revealing the secrets and spiritual learnings too. So this particular native will be having a basic education. Number one, either it deals with the spiritual learning or deals with the knowledge that will help for this particular native to reveal some of the secrets. At this point, let's not worry about what the secrets are, in which profession is that, just leave it there it is. The 5th house lord is again Mercury, Vidyasthanama, and 5th house deals with advanced education. And what you can see here in the 5th house is that Mercury, the 2nd house lord, is again in the 5th house lord. So the advanced education will be something that deals with the speech and communication. At the same time, because the Mercury is in the Lagna-Adhipathi and residing in the 1st and 6th house lord Venus and got afflicted, and in this chart, the 5th house will be a little bit chaotic. Let's go to the 6th house. The 6th house lord, 6th house is Rogasthanamo, and Rogasthana-Adhipathi is Venus. The first and 6th house lord Venus is in the 9th house, co-joined with the 2nd and 5th house lord Mercury. Great, that's good. The 7th house. The 7th house is Marakasthanamo or spouse, either of the way you can read it. And the 7th house lord is Mars. And Mars is residing in the 12th house. Mars is also the lord of the 12th house. So the 7th and the 12th house lord is residing in 12th house, in its own house. And look at it, from 12th house, Mars is having a direct aspect. So remember, Mars has three aspects: 4th, 7th, and 8th. Mars is having a direct aspect on the 6th house, Rogasthanamo. That's the first thing. And second, Mars is having the 8th aspect. Using its 8th aspect, it is looking on the 7th house, Marakasthanamo, which it owns. This is very important here in this particular chart. Is the 12th house lord Mars is residing in the 12th house, having a direct aspect on the 6th house, and also having an 8th aspect on the 7th house. And again, the 12th house lord is again the 7th house lord. That's very important when you are trying to look at these particular natives in a long term. When it comes to Rogasthanamo, means health. Marakasthanamo is 7th house. That is the 7th house. And 12th house is place of cure, which is hospitalizations. The next one is the 8th house. The 8th house lord is Jupiter. Where is Jupiter? Being 8th house lord, it's a functional mal. It became a functional malefic. So let's go and look at where is the 8th house lord Jupiter residing. 8th house lord Jupiter is residing in the 1st house, Lagna-Adhipathi. That means the 8th house lord Marakasthanadipati, 8th house lord, is residing in the 1st house, Dhanusthanamo, and having a direct aspect on the 7th house. Remember, and one more thing, when I go more in detail about the aspects, I'll talk about it. Let me stop here. The 9th house. The 9th and the 10th house lord is Saturn. Where is Saturn residing? Saturn is residing in the 12th house, which is Aries. Saturn is debilitated in Aries. That becomes the 9th and the 12th house lord, even though 9th and 12th house lord is a natural malefic and residing in the 12th house, co-joined with the 12th house lord and having a direct aspect on the 6th house, Rogasthanamo. Saturn could not do that much bad to this native because Saturn got debilitated here. 11th house. The 11th house lord is Jupiter, and Jupiter is residing, again, I told you, it's in the 1st house. Jupiter is residing in the 1st house. The 12th house lord is place of cure, and the place of cure, Jupiter, is Mars, and Mars is residing in its own house. See, so when we look at in a particular house, in which houses are there more than one planet residing, if you look at it, you'll see 9th house and the 12th house. these are the two houses where you see more than one planet residing. That's very important when we go more in detail and try to look at the particular native and where the native is, how the native's future was.
Let's now start analyzing the planetary aspects or drishtis for all the planets. Basically, except Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, all other planets have a direct aspect on the 7th house from its natal position. So let's start with that particular concept. Sun, who is residing in the 8th house, became a functional malefic because it is residing in the 8th house. Now it is having a direct aspect on the 2nd house. 2nd house is Marakasthanamo. So 8th house, from 8th house, Sun is looking into to the 2nd house. Just keep it there. The next is Moon. Moon is in the 5th house, so it is having its direct aspect on the 11th house. The next is Mercury. 2nd and 5th house Lord Mercury. 2nd house is Marakasthanamo. So 2nd and 5th house Lord Mercury is residing in the 9th house and having a direct aspect on the 3rd house. That is Venus. 1st and 6th house Lord. 1st house is Dhanusthanamo and 6th house is Rogasthanamo. The 1st and 6th house Lord Venus is residing in the 9th house and having a direct aspect on the 3rd house. Remember, in the 9th house you have Mercury, the 2nd house Lord, and the 6th house Lord Venus. They both are conjoined in the 9th house and they are looking into the 3rd house. The next one is Rahu. Rahu is in 4th house having a direct aspect on the 10th house, and Ketu is in the 10th house having a direct aspect on the 4th house. So until this point everything is fine. Now let's go and look at the planets that have the multiple aspects. We'll start with Mars. Mars is the lord of the 7th and 12th houses. 7th house is Marakasthanamo, 12th house is place of cure, and Mars is residing in 12th house. That means the 7th and 12th house Lord Mars is residing in its own house. So Mars became a very crucial planet for this particular native. And now let's go and start looking at the aspects. Mars has, the first aspect that Mars have is the 4th aspect from its natal position, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the 3rd house. Remember, Mercury, Venus are already looking at the 3rd house and now we have Mars also look at the 3rd house. So the 3rd house became very bad. Then the Mars direct aspect is on the 6th house owned by Venus, which is the Rogasthanamo, and Mars 8th aspect is on the 7th house, its own house. That's the reason, not only being 12th and 7th house Lord Mars, look at it, 12th and 7th house Lord is Mars. Mars is residing in the 12th house and Mars is looking at the 7th house. So the whole 12th house and the 7th house is completely ruled by the owner Mars itself. Then next, and also 7th house is empty. Then next comes Jupiter. Jupiter is the 8th house Lord, house of death. 8th house, that means Jupiter became a functional malefic here, and Jupiter is residing in the 1st house. That's the biggest disadvantage for this native. Any planet that residing in the 1st house is for sure to have a direct aspect on the 7th house, which is the Marakasthanamo. So 8th house Lord Jupiter residing in the 1st house and looking at the 7th house is always indicates that this particular native will have the death like situations more frequently. Remember, the 12th house Lord Mars is also looking at the 7th house. That means that death like situations might be resulting either before hospitalizations or long-term hospitalizations, either of those. And now comes Jupiter. Jupiter's 5th aspect is on Moon. Okay, that's fine. And Jupiter's 9th aspect is on the 9th house. Oh, great. Remember who is in the 9th house? In 9th house, first of all, let's go back. Jupiter is the 8th house Lord, so it's a functional malefic. It's already having a direct aspect on the 7th house. Now it is looking at the 9th house where the 1st and 6th house Lord Venus is residing. Jupiter is residing in the house owned by Venus. Jupiter is looking into the house where Venus is residing, and Venus is the Rogasthana-Adhipathi too. Not as if that is not sufficient, Jupiter residing in the first house is looking at the 7th house Marakasthanamo, and Jupiter residing in the first house is looking in the 9th house where the 2nd house lord, another Marakasthanadhipati Mercury, is residing. No wonder this particular native, for his or her whole lifetime, this native will be having challenges when it comes to the health or hospitalizations and frequent death related situations. Now let us go to Saturn. Fortunately, Saturn is debilitated or Nicha. That is the biggest advantage for this particular native. And from Saturn, oh great, Saturn's third aspect residing in the 12th house, it is looking at the 2nd house. Remember, 2nd house is Marakasthanadhipati, Marakasthanamo, and the Marakasthanadhipati Mercury is residing in the house owned by Saturn. So there is a the Saturn now not only residing in the 12th house place of cure, it is also looking at the 2nd house Marakasthanamo, which is not a good sign. And then Saturn's direct aspect is on the 6th house, which is the Rogasthanamu, and the 6th house lord Venus is also in the house owned by Saturn. The 2nd house lord Mercury is residing in Saturn, the 6th house lord Venus is residing in the house owned by Saturn, and Saturn is having a third aspect on the 2nd house and the direct aspect on the 6th house. No wonder this particular native life became completely chaotic. As if that's not sufficient, go and look at it. Saturn's 10th aspect, Saturn residing in the 12th house, its 10th aspect is on the 9th house, its own house. And who is residing in its own house? Venus and Mercury. So Saturn is looking at the house owned by Venus, Saturn is looking at the house owned by Venus, Saturn is looking at its own house where the 2nd and 6th houses that it is already looking are residing in its own house. So Saturn now became the controller of the 2nd house Marakasthanamu, the 6th house the Rogasthanamu, and residing in the 12th house place of cure. Everything is now controlled by Mars and Saturn, and they both are co-joined there. The only advantage this particular native has, when I looked at the whole chart, is that Saturn is debilitated. That's all. Let's now start analyzing the birth chart on a house by house basis. The first house is called Lagna-Sthanamo or Tanusthanamo or Lagna-Sthanamo, and generally the first house is tells you the person's personality, how does he look, the face, the temperament, the strength. These are the general characteristics that you can see from the first house. And when you look at the medical part of it, first house talks about the complexion, skin texture, longevity, the sleep, head. The most important here is head and brain. So the first house talks about head and brain. That means the way what you are thinking, everything, and it also talks about longevity. So let's go and see for the first house. Which one is the first house? The first house is Vrishabha or Taurus. That means that's the 2nd house in the zodiac sign, the natural 2nd house. And when you say it is the natural 2nd house, when you look at it down further, 2nd house talks about speech and tongue. So the natural 2nd house became the first house for this particular native, indicating that whatever happens to this native will be related to speech and tongue, and that is being the characteristics of the natural 2nd house, and then head and brain being the functional first house. Functional first house means that's the Lagna for this particular native. And then the question comes is, who is in the first house? In the first house you see the 8th house lord Jupiter. Any planet that owns the 8th house is by default considered as a functional malefic, even if it is a benefic planet. Here Jupiter, being a natural benefic, is now owning the 8th house, so it became the functional malefic. So whatever good thing that Jupiter is supposed to give to this particular native, the native will not receive all that part of it. So there's a chance that this native will get most of the negative of the other malefic planets, or least positive from this benefic planet Jupiter. And then who is the house lord? Oh, by the by, we have the next column, it says is planets aspecting the house. No planets are aspecting the house, so it is empty. The next comes is who is the house lord? That means the Lagna-Adhipathi. Lagna-Adhipathi is Venus, and Venus is in the 10th house, from 10th house in the zodiac sign. That means the 9th house from Rashi Lagna, and it's residing in the house owned by a malefic Saturn. And then comes who is it associated with? The Lagna-Adhipathi is associated with Mercury. Mercury is the second and fifth house lord, Mercury. And the next question comes is planets aspecting the house lord. So that means the house lord Venus, Lagna-Adhipathi Venus, is residing in the 9th house. So we have to go and see like which planets are aspecting the 9th house. We know Mercury is residing in the 9th house, so Mercury is co-joined with the Lagna-Adhipathi. And now when you look at it, Jupiter's 10th aspect is on Venus, Lagna-Adhipathi. That means the malefic 8th house lord, functional malefic Jupiter, is residing in the 1st house, and its 9th aspect is on the 9th house. Yes, that's where the 1st house lord is residing. That's enough to tell you that how this particular natives, from a health perspective, this particular native will always be having some threat for life, for his or her life. The next comes is who else is aspecting Saturn? Why is Saturn aspecting? Where is Saturn? Saturn is in 12th house. So Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 9th house. Saturn owns the 9th house. It's residing in the 12th house and aspecting the 9th house. It's looking at its own house where the 1st house lord is residing. So being in a natural malefic and residing in the 12th house, Saturn can have an impact on this particular native, because it has because the native, the Lagna-Adhipathi, is residing in the house owned by Saturn, and Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 9th house. So that's how you see the 1st house. Now let's go to the 2nd house. The 2nd house is Dhanasthanama and Kutumbasthanama. So Dhanasthanama is earnings, is wealth. Kutumbasthanama is family affairs. So that's what does the 2nd house deals with apart from those two. Apart from wealth, affluence, family relationship, 2nd house also deals with speech, right eye, neck, creativity and death. Death because 2nd house is Marakasthanama, so it also talks with the type of death, not the place of death, the type of death. What type of the death might occur? It is the 7th house that tells you the place of death, where exactly will the death occur. So the 2nd house is Gemini, the natural 3rd house. There's no planets are inside the 2nd house. 2nd house is empty. But when you look at it, who are aspecting the 2nd house? 2 planets are aspecting. That's the very important thing. Sun residing in the 8th house got afflicted, and Sun is directly looking at the 2nd house. 2nd house deals with the speech, right eye, neck, creativity. So when the 8th house planet Sun is residing in the 8th house and looking at the 2nd house, 8th house deals with the death, 8th house deals with this unknown secret affairs or secret learning or revealing some of the secrets. So this particular native is what it is supposed to do for this particular native. And apart from Sun, you see the Saturn's 3rd aspect is on the 2nd house. Yeah, Saturn's 3rd aspect is on the 2nd house. So you can, for sure, you can say that something is going to happen, because Saturn is his 9th house lord and residing in the 12th house. Something sure is going to happen for
this particular native pertaining to 12th house. 12th house deals with 12th house deals with place of cure, or you can call it as hospitalization. So 12th house deals with place of cure or hospitalization, and Saturn residing with the 12th house lord and looking at the 6th house with a direct aspect on the 6th house. And when it is looking at the 2nd house, you can see something pertaining to speech will have a problem for this particular native down the road. So we don't know exactly when it is going to happen, but it is sure to happen. The next comes is who is the house lord? We know the house lord is Mercury, and Mercury we know that it's already in the 1st house co-joined with Mercury is in the 9th house co-joined with the Lagna-Adhipathi Venus. And then comes planets who are aspecting the lord. Since Mercury is co-joined with Venus, Jupiter and Saturn will aspect aspecting the 9th house. So if you look at it, Saturn is aspecting the house owned by Mercury, and Saturn is aspecting the house where Mercury is residing, and Mercury is the lord of the 2nd house. So it tells you that two things are sure to happen. The 2nd house will have an affliction either pertaining to Dhanabhava or Kutumbasthanamo. We don't know either of these two, but something pertaining to speech, right eye, neck, creative potential and death, or they are going to, or something happens in his life, in the native's life pertaining to these things: speech, right eye, neck, creative potential and death. So when we go more in detail, we can see how this particular native's life had been impacted, and that is due to this 2nd house. The 3rd house, which I don't take much concentration on, is the 3rd house, which is the Parakramasthanamu or Bhatrusthanamo and Sahajasthanamoto. That means Parakrama means daringness, Bhatru means brothers and siblings, and Sahaja means the, I don't know what it is called as. So basically this particular, some people call this 3rd house also talks about longevity, which I have no idea why they say it, but because it is the 2nd to the 2nd house, so the 3rd house may be treated as longevity too. And sometimes, yeah, that's what I mentioned here. But when you look at the medical part of it, the 3rd house deals with the throat, shoulders and mental instability. Yes, the 3rd house deals with mental instability, and when you look at it, because of that reason, let's go and look at who is the lord of the 3rd house. The 3rd house lord is Moon. Moon is residing in the 5th house. Yes, Moon is residing in the 5th house owned by Mercury. Wow. And who is looking at the 5th house? We know Jupiter is residing in the 1st house, so naturally Jupiter's 5th aspect is going to be on the 5th house. Jupiter is the 8th house lord, so the 8th house lord is looking at the 3rd house lord in the 5th house. So since 3rd house deals with throat, neck, right ear and mental instability, something pertaining to the upper part of the body, like the face, all the important stuff that is on the face, like your eyes, ears, nose, throat, speech, tongue, all these things are going to have some sort of an impact because due to this affliction. Having said the first 3 houses, let's go to the 4th house. The 4th house is Matrubhava and Sukhasthanamu, and 4th house talks about home life environment, the mother native's mother, and the landed property, what are the property that the person owns, the personal conveyances, and it also medically, from a medical perspective, it talks about your chest, lungs, heart. And so since the 4th house, it talks a lot about your chest, lungs, heart and the other parts. Let's go and see who is there. Who the 4th house, the natural is the Leo is the 4th house, and who is residing in the 4th house? Rahu is residing in the 4th house. There is your malefic. So one malefic planet is residing in the 4th house, so that house got afflicted, that's for sure.
There's no need to see it. And then the next question comes is, who is the lord of the 4th house? The 4th house lord is sun, but the sun is residing in 8th house, becoming a functional malefic. So the sun becoming a functional malefic, it is by residing in the 8th house, the 4th house lord became functional malefic. And now comes the most important part, is who is looking at this 4th house. If you look at it, no, except Rahu, the Rahu and Ketu, except that nobody else is looking at this 4th house. Yeah, nobody else is looking at this 4th house. So now let's go to the 5th house. The 5th house is Vidyasthanamo, Putrasthanamo. So, and higher education and children. That's what the 5th house talks about. But the most important thing here is the 5th house talks about the psychological disposition of the native. And since we are aware of this native's life, we have to see like how the 5th house got afflicted and why it got afflicted. Let's go and see what is the 5th house. Which planet is there? Planet Moon is in the 5th house. That means 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 3rd house lord, the Moon, is residing in the 5th house. And 8th house lord Jupiter, who is a functional malefic, is having its 5th aspect on the 5th house. That's fine. And who owns this 5th house? Mercury, who is the 2nd house lord. That means the Maragasthanadipati is owning this 5th house. So the house lord is a Maragasthanadipati. Though naturally the 5th house gets partially afflicted, and Jupiter, the functional malefic, is having the 5th aspect, so it got further afflicted. Because of that, the Moon got afflicted. Moon directly relates to mind, so the mind got afflicted. That's the reason why I said that we have to emphasize on the psychological dispositioning. That's what this house relates to. And then comes we know that the Mercury is the 5th house lord, and Mercury is co-joined with the 1st and 6th house lord Venus in the 9th house. We know that. And then comes who else is looking at the Mercury? As we know, Jupiter is looking at in the 5th house. Jupiter is looking at the 5th house owned by Mercury. Jupiter is looking at the 9th house where Mercury is residing. And then Jupiter is the 8th house lord. Saturn is in the 12th house, and its 10th aspect is on the 9th house. Yes, Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 9th house because it is in the 12th house. So you can see that the lord got spoiled and the house got spoiled. And since now you have seen the 2nd house got spoiled because Mercury, not only that the Mercury got spoiled, the house also got spoiled because of Saturn's 3rd aspect. And the Sun looking from the 8th house directly looking at the 2nd house. 2nd house deals with the speech. And now the 5th house got spoiled. 5th house deals with the psychological dispositioning. That's why here they called it as mind, mental illness. These are the two major things that comes in from a medical perspective for the 5th house. Now let's go to, we know that the 2nd and the 5th house, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, all of them have some sort of an affliction for this particular native. Now let's go and look at the 6th house. The 6th house is Rogasthanamo. That means wounds on the body, illness, employment conditions, and sometimes it also medically it also talks about the eye diseases, poisoning, accidents, operations, or surgery, either of those things. So let's go and see who is in the 6th house. 6th house fortunately is empty, and 6th house, Saturn and Mars residing in the 12th house are having a direct aspect on the 6th house. That's the biggest problem here. 6th house lord is Venus. Venus is residing in the 9th house, and Saturn's 10th aspect is already on the 9th house. So what else can we say about this particular guy? Now this is up to the 6th house. Let's go and look at the next house, which is the 7th house. 7th house is very important here because 7th house is also called as Marakasthanamo, and medically 7th house, most of the time the 7th house deals with the lower part of the body, and it talks about the foreign travel, wives, business partnerships, and all other stuffs. So let's see who is in the 7th house. 7th house Lord is Mars. Yeah, 12th and 7th house Lord is Mars. Mars Lord is residing in its own house in the 12th house. The 7th house Lord is co-joined with the Saturn, a malefic, and the 7th house is empty, fortunately. So Jupiter's direct aspect is on the 7th house. That means the 8th house Lord direct aspect is on the 7th house, and Mars 8th aspect is on the 7th house too. So this is how the 7th house got spoiled. That means this particular native is going to have some sort of issues pertaining to the lower part of his body, his or her body, and there are some issues for loss of memory, recovery of lost wealth, attainment of status, and all other stuffs. Let's go to the 8th house. This is the most crucial house, is the Mrityusthanamu. Mrityusthanamu, while it talks about the death and the longevity, if from a medical perspective, it talks about the cause of death and severe mental anguish. Wow. Cause of death and severe mental anguish. So the 8th house is the one that talks about all those things, and in the 8th house you have Sun. Sun, being the 5th house Lord, is now residing in the 8th house and Sun's direct aspect is on the 2nd house. That's all. So let's not talk about that part of it. The 9th house. 9th house is Bhagyasthanamu and Dharmasthanamu. From you look at the medical perspective, 9th house deals with the hips and thighs. That's all. And in 9th house you have the 1st and 6th house Lord Venus, 2nd and 5th house Lord Mercury is in the 9th house. Jupiter's 9th aspect is on the 9th house. The 8th house Lord Jupiter's 9th aspect is on the 9th house. Saturn, the owner of the 9th house, is residing in the 12th house, and its 10th aspect is on the 9th house. So the 9th house is so badly that the native will be either having some sort of an issue pertaining to Dharmasthanamu or Bhagyasthanamu. While there is nothing specific to talk about the 10th house, which is the Pitrasthanamu, and 11th house Labhasthanamu, I am directly jumping to the 12th house. The 12th house is Moksha Bhava and Vyayasthanamu. Vyayasthanamu means expenditures, and at the same time 12th house also deals with foreign settlement. 12th house deals with the places of cure, and 12th house also deals with the death because it is a Moksha Sthanamu. That's the last part of the human life is Moksha Sthanamu. And also medically, when you look at it, 12th house deals with the sleep disorders, mental imbalance, hospitalization, left eye, and death. So this native has some sort of an issues pertaining to sleep disorders and mental imbalance and frequent hospitalizations because the 12th house Lord is Mars. 7th and 12th house Lord is Mars, and Mars is residing in its own house, having it in its own house and having a direct aspect on the 6th house. Also the 9th and 10th house Lord, another natural malefic Saturn, is residing in the 12th house, co-joined with the 12th house Lord, and Saturn's third aspect is on the 2nd house, which deals with the speech, and the direct aspect is on the 6th house, which is the Rogasthanamu, and the 10th aspect is on the 9th house, where the 1st and 2nd house Lord is residing. So the 12th house became so important for this particular native. Having discussed about the D1 chart, the planets, the house that they own, and then the houses that they aspect, and then we had a detailed each individual house analysis. Now, having done all of those things, let's go and look at the same planets but from a nakshatra concept perspective. So if you look at it, the first and the foremost what you have to do is look for the Janma nakshatra for any native. Janma nakshatra means the nakshatra where natal moon is residing, and everything when you do the and when you do the analysis based on nakshatra, the first everything will be in relative with the Janma nakshatra. So first, what is the Janma nakshatra? Moon. Moon is residing in Uttara Falguni, okay, and the Uttara Falguni ruler is Sun. That means Moon is residing in the nakshatra owned by Sun. Where is Sun? Then immediately go to the D1 chart and say what is Sun. Sun owns 5th house. That's a very good house. But where is Sun residing? Sun is residing in the 8th house. That means it became a functional malefic because it is residing in the 8th house. And the Sun is directly looking at the 2nd house, which is the Marakasthanamu. That means that the Janma nakshatra itself the Moon is residing in a nakshatra which itself is what do I say? How do I say? Itself tells you that this particular native will struggle in his life, struggling between diseases, illness, hospitalizations, and possibly struggle between life and death. The Janma nakshatra itself tells you that, because Moon is residing in the house owned by Sun. Now let's start looking from the other planets. The first and 6th house lord is Venus. So where is Venus residing? Venus is residing in the nakshatra Dhanishta nakshatra, and Dhanishta nakshatra owner is Mars. Mars is the lord of the 7th and 12th houses. Look, Mars is the lord of the 7th and 12th houses, residing in the 12th house. Venus is the Rogasthana-Adhipathi and Tanusthana-Adhipathi, 1st and 6th house lords. So where is Venus the nakshatra, in which nakshatra is Venus residing is, it's residing in the nakshatra owned by Mars. So you can understand how the native's health will be. And now with respect to Janma nakshatra, which is Uttara Falguni, with respect to Janma nakshatra Uttara Falguni, Dhanishta, the result is Vipata nakshatra. Vipata nakshatra means it's a bad. So that means the 1st house lord is residing in a nakshatra which is bad with respect to Janma nakshatra. And now let's go to Mercury. 2nd and 5th house lord is Mercury. Mercury is residing in Uttarashada. Uttarashada nakshatra owner is Sun, and we know Sun. I already told you Moon. So the 3rd house lord Moon, the 2nd and 5th house lord Mercury are already residing in the nakshatra owned by Sun. And then comes from Janma nakshatra. With respect to Janma nakshatra Uttara Falguni, Uttarashada is not good. So that means it's not Jananam nakshatra. So it's not a good nakshatra. Let's go to the 3rd one is Sun. Where is Sun residing? Sun is residing in Purvashada, owned by Venus. That means the 8th house planet Sun, who is residing in the 8th house and became a functional malefic, is residing in the nakshatra owned by the 6th house lord Venus, Rogasthana-Adhipathi. And then, but the only advantage here is Purvashada, when you compare it, when you see the relationship between the Janma nakshatra and Purvashada, the relationship is very good. Paramitra, it is a Paramamitra nakshatra. That means it's a very good for the relationship. That might be the reason why the native was able to survive. We don't know. The next one is Mars. Mars is residing in Ashwini nakshatra, and the ruler for Ashwini is Ketu. Ketu is just, we know it is a Rakshasa nakshatra. So Mars will always behave like a Rakshasa nakshatra. That means either suck the bloods or put some sort of a violent behavior or something like that. And then when you look at the relationship between the Janma nakshatra and Ashwini, it is Mitra nakshatra. Oh, that's good. So that might be the reason why the native was able to survive. The next one is Jupiter. Jupiter is residing in Rohini nakshatra, and the ruler is Moon. So the Moon is the 3rd house lord, and a Moon is residing in the 4th house owned by Sun, and Jupiter is residing in the 1st house. So the 8th house lord is residing in the nakshatra owned by Moon. Moon means mind. So this particular relationship says that, based on the nakshatra also, you can say that the death of this particular native will be something that's related to mind. Mind in the sense, I should say it as head, brain, or something like that, mind. And then comes, oh, and by the by, the Rohini with respect to Janma Nakshatra, Rohini is Sampatatara. Sampatatara means very good, that's good, then that means no need to worry about it. And then comes Saturn. Look here, Saturn is debilitated or Nicha. That's the biggest advantage for Saturn, for this particular native to have Saturn being Nicha, even though it is in the 12th house and co-joined with the 12th house lord and looking at the 6th, having a direct aspect on the 6th house. Even though it is doing all those things, because it is Nicha, the negative impact of this malefic planet gets minimized. Saturn is residing in the Kritika Nakshatra. Kritika Nakshatra owner is Sun. Oh, great. We all know that, first of all, the Sun and Saturn are bitter enemies. That means Saturn is residing in the nakshatra owned by its bitter enemy. So, for sure, something bad is he will do. And the second thing is, with respect to Janma Nakshatra, Kritika is not good. So, we know what is going to happen. That's all. So, we had gone through all the planets and the nakshatras that they are residing, and what is the relationship of their nakshatra where they are residing with the Janma Nakshatra. So when you summarize it, we have only two bad, which is Dhanishta. Dhanishta Nakshatra means Venus. The Lagna-Adhipathi is residing in the bad, Vipatatatara when with respect to Janma Nakshatra, and then Moon is not good. Okay, that's fine. Moon is the Janma Nakshatram, that's fine. Uttarashada is Mercury, the 2nd and 5th house lord Uttarashada is residing in Uttarashada, which is not good. And 9th and 10th house lord Saturn is residing in Kritika, which is not good with respect to Janma Nakshatra. Then comes the very good. The general moderate good is Mars. Mars is residing in Mitratara with respect to Janma Nakshatra, so that's moderate. And then the very good that you can see here is only Sun in Purvashada. That's the only Sun and Jupiter, both of them. Sun and Jupiter are both the planets are residing in a very good nakshatra with respect to Janma Nakshatra. That is the exact reason why this particular native had such a the longevity is very high. Look at it. Jupiter is the 8th house lord. Jupiter's 7th aspect is on the 7th house, 9th aspect is on the 9th house where Venus and Mercury are residing. Okay, so by default, if Jupiter is residing in the bad nakshatra with respect to Janma Nakshatra, either Vipatatara or what's the other one, or Janmakatara, then Mitra, okay, then we are sure that the native would not have had this much longevity. And the same goes for Sun. Sun, even though it is a 5th house lord residing in the 8th house, became the functional malefic, and because it is residing in the nakshatra that is good with very good, not good, very good with respect to Janma Nakshatra, the native was able to survive. Okay, let's now start analyzing the D1 chart using the Kaksha Lord and the Lord where that Kaksha Lord is residing. First and foremost, you see is where is Sun. The Sun is in the 8th house. Based upon the inclination of the Sun for each planet, we will be knowing who is the Kaksha Lord. So for Sun, the Kaksha Lord is Moon, and Moon owns the 3rd house and resides in the 5th house that is owned by Mercury. The next is Moon. Moon is the 3rd house lord, and Moon deals with mind, and Moon is residing in the Kaksha owned by Saturn. That means the mind for this particular native is being controlled by Saturn, the natural malefic, and also Saturn owns the 9th and 10th houses. The 9th house is Dharmasthanama, the 10th house is the Karmasthanama. Then comes Mars. Mars is the lord of 7th and 12th houses, and Mars is residing in the Kaksha owned by Jupiter. This is very important here. Mars is the lord of the 7th house, which is the Marakasthanama, and the 12th house, which is the Mokshasthanama, or you can say it as place of cure, which is hospitalizations, hospitals or hospitalizations. And the Lord Mars is residing in that Kaksha owned by Jupiter, where Jupiter is the 8th house lord. That is the reason why for this particular native, during his whole lifetime, he was struggling between life and death. You can see clearly that the 8th house lord is residing in the 1st house, having a direct aspect on the 7th house, which is owned by Mars, and Mars is residing in the Kaksha owned by Jupiter. So the relationship between the 8th house lord Jupiter, the 6th, 7th and 12th house lord Mars is so high, and since Jupiter is residing in the 1st house, it becomes the Tanusthanamo. So for this particular native, you will see that the native has gone through a number of life and death situations in his lifetime. The next is Rahu. Rahu is residing in the Kaksha of Mercury. Mercury is the 2nd house lord, Marakasthana-Adhipathi. So Rahu, the terminator, is residing in the Kaksha of Marakasthana-Adhipathi. And then comes Jupiter. Jupiter is the 8th house lord, and Jupiter is residing in the Kaksha owned by Mercury. That means the 8th house lord is residing in the Kaksha owned by the Marakasthana-Adhipathi, Mercury. And then comes, and we know Mercury is the 2nd house lord. That's the reason why I keep saying it's Marakasthana-Adhipathi. And the next comes is Saturn. Saturn is the natural malefic. And now where is Saturn residing? Saturn is residing in the Kaksha of Venus. That's the very important thing here you have to notice is Saturn is residing in the Kaksha of Venus, and Venus is the lord of the 1st and 6th houses. 1st house is Tanusthanamo, 6th house is Rogasthanamo. So Saturn is residing in the Kaksha of Rogasthanadipati. The lord of our diseases is Rogasthanadipati. And now in the D1 chart, if you look at it, Venus is residing in the house owned by Saturn. So earlier we saw the strong bondage between Jupiter and Mars. Now we are seeing a strong bondage between Venus and Saturn. The next is Mercury. Mercury is residing in the Kaksha of Jupiter. Jupiter is the 8th house lord. Mercury is Marakasthana-Adhipati, and so Mercury is residing in the Kaksha of Jupiter. And if you go back and see, Jupiter is residing in the Kaksha of Mercury. So the 8th house lord, the relationship between the 8th house lord and the 7th house lord is again strong. That's the reason why you can see the native has gone through so many issues, which I am going to tell more in detail later. The last one is Venus. Venus is residing in its own Kaksha. That's the reason why Venus is so strong that the Rogasthanamo has become very powerful. And since Venus is the house owned by Saturn, and Saturn is residing in the Kaksha of Venus, the Rogasthanamo became very powerful for this particular native. Let me now start discussing the D1 chart for Stephen Hawking's. First and foremost, when you look at the D1 chart, when you are trying to do the detailed analysis, what you need to do is to look at what's the Lagna or the ascendant, who is the Lagna-Adhipathi, and that Lagna-Adhipathi is the one that tells you a little bit about the person in general, the core characteristics of the person. Here for what is his name, Stephen Hawking's, the Lagna-Adhipathi is Venus. Yes, Venus is the Lagna-Adhipathi. So that tells you that when Venus is the Lagna-Adhipathi, and Venus is also the 6th house lord, 1st and 6th house lord is Venus. Two things you have to keep in mind. Number one, 6th Venus, the 1st house being Lagna-Adhipathi being Venus, the native will be charming, will be having a creative mind, and has a vision of something that is more inclined toward analytical and logical way of thinking. These are the things that you usually look at for Venus. And also, since Venus is the 6th house lord, Venus also talks about 6th house is the employment conditions. So the natives employment conditions will be something that's dealing with the designing part of it, creativity, entertainment, arts, music. These are all the things that pertains to Venus. So now we know that Venus is the 1st house lord, and when you look at Venus, Venus is in the 12, 11, 10, 9th house. So Dhanasthana-adhipati is in the 9th house, Bhagyasthanam. It's not Dhanasthanam, Bhagyasthanam. So Venus, the first and then 6th house lord, is in the Bhagyasthanam. So when you look this, when you see Venus in the Bhagyasthanam, the first house and 6th house lord in Bhagyasthanam, very quickly there is a possibility to jump to a conclusion that this native will have a career in something pertaining to entertainment industry or arts, or become a musician, or becomes an engineer with more creativity, where creativity and design is the core responsibility. Okay, so at this point, let's not talk about anything about what the native is. We don't know anything about this native at this point. So with that assumption, I'm going to try to analyze this particular native's chart. Once you find out what is the first house lord and where the first house lord is residing, you will understand that the core value for this particular native is clear. And then what you got to do is that this is the first step I do it. The second step that I go for is, at the time of birth, what is the Mahadasa balance running, and under what Dasa, Vimsottari Dasa was the native born. You go through that, and when you look at it, there is a way you can say is that by looking at the Mahadasa at the time of birth, you can have an idea about what is the purpose of this particular native's birth. So that's the second thing that you have to look at. I usually look at it. So now that I have told you about the first house lord and its positioning and what could be the core value of this particular native, let me go and say that, or see what is the Mahadasa at the time of birth, and try to understand based upon the Mahadasa what could be the reason for this particular native's birth. Sometimes by looking at it at the Mahadasa at the time of birth, you can say what could happen to this particular native in career or in future, or everything like that. In the next few minutes, I am going to give more details about the Mahadasa of Sun at the time of birth. When you look at the Sun is the balance period of Sun is there at the time of the native's birth. So we start looking at what is Sun, who is Sun in the natal chart. Planet Sun is in the 8th house from Rashi Lagna. Its zodiac sign is Dhanus Sagittarius. It's in the 9th house from the natural house is the 9th house, but from Rashi Lagna it is in the 8th house. 8th house is the house of death, or Marakasthanam, Mrutyusthanam, sorry. And then the Sun's inclination is 24 degrees 28 minutes. And when you look at the Kaksha, Moon, the Sun is residing in the Kaksha owned by Moon. Moon is your mind, indicates mind. That means at the time of birth, it's clearly given that from a high level, you can guess that or predict that for this particular native, since Sun is in the 8th house and having a direct aspect on the 2nd house, and since Sun is residing in the Kaksha owned by Moon, this particular native will have two things for sure. Number one, 8th house is the Mrutyusthanamo, so the death will be something that's pertaining to mind. Since it is directly looking at the 2nd house, which is also Marakasthanamo, so that death will be something that's pertaining to mind. Also, 2nd house deals with the speech. So something that's pertaining to speech there will be some sort of a problem pertaining to speech in the native's mind. So that's how you just get a rough idea. What exactly is that? When will that problem comes? For that you have to go more in detail. But when you look at the Mahadasa at the time of birth and try to analyze the purpose of this particular native's birth is two. If you take Sun, the 8th house as Mrutyusthanamo, then I explained earlier. Second thing is 8th house also deals with the secret affairs and revealing some secrets. So the native has the ability in his mind. The native has something in his mind that is able to reveal some of the secrets which no one has known, and we don't know what exactly is that. And those secrets, because it is looking in the second house, which is communication, those secrets will be revealed through some sort of a communicating method or technique used. So at this point we don't know anything more than that. That's what the Natu will be doing. That's the purpose of birth for this particular Natu. And now, since Natu Sun is in the 8th house, let's go and just look at the 8th house. If Sun resides in the 8th house, it denotes deep creativity and large understanding of life. The chief purpose of the Sun in this house is to give sensitivity to other people's values, and there probably will be some responsibility. And they said that this particular Natu, whoever the Natu is, will enter stock market, banking, pensions, and some form of sociological investigation, or but a few fields that may attract. Natu, whatever the field the Natu enters, the Natu will be creative, investigative, and thorough as a research. So if you look the 8th house for the ability for the Natu to have the ability to reveal some of the secrets, because Sun is in the 8th house, that clearly tells you that creativity, investigative method ideas, and being thorough researcher are the three things that this particular Natu will be using as tools to reveal the secrets. Now that we had gone through the first house lord and the ascendant, its position, and the houses that it own, and did that analysis, the second step, when you are doing a detailed deep dive analysis for any particular Natu, the next step that I do is to look at the Mahadasa of the planet at the time of birth, and then try to look like, okay, which house does the Mahadasa own, where is the Mahadasa planet residing, which houses is it aspecting, and are there any malefics co-joined, are there any malefics aspecting the house where the Mahadasa planet is residing. These are all the things that which you need to look at it before you even try to understand what is the reason for this particular Natu's birth. So first and foremost, you have to, here for this particular Natu, the balanced Mahadasa is Sun. So let's go and look at Sun. Sun is the 5th house lord. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4th house lord. Sun is the 4th house lord. 4th house lord is basic education, and the 4th house lord is home life environment. So we know that there's something that's pertaining to basic education, something that's pertaining to home life environment is the core for this particular Natu's birth. And in the home life environment, you have Rahu residing. So either the basic education will be dynamic or the home life environment will be dynamic. That's all we know at this point. Now let's go and look at where is Sun residing. Sun is residing in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th house. Sun is residing in the 8th house. Remember, the 8th house is Marakasthanamo, the house of death. The 8th house also talks about secret affairs. The 8th house also talks with something which is not known, secrecy will be revealed at that point by this particular Natu. And if you look at it, the 8th house lord is Jupiter, who is residing in the 1st house. So the Natu has the ability to have a secret affair or reveal some of the secrets, and at the same time the Natu's death is something that is unknown. Unknown in the sense, what's the cause of the death is not easily known. And remember, Sun is the lord of the 4th house too. So the home life environment is completely secretive, and with Rahu residing there, it's full of dynamic. It's very dynamic. And now you go and look at being residing in the 8th house. Sun is directly looking at the 2nd house. 2nd house is the cause of death. Because 8th house is Marakasthanamo, a 2nd house is the cause of death. It's also called Marakasthanamos. 8th, 2nd and 7th houses are also called Marakasthanam along with the 8th house. So from 8th house, the 4th house lord is having a direct aspect on the 2nd house. And remember what? 2nd house is empty, which is Mercury is the owner, so we don't need to worry about that part of it. And the next thing what you have to do is there any planet? Is there any planet that's having a direct aspect, some sort of an aspect on the 8th house? when you look at Saturn and Mars, they both are on the 12th house. So from 12th house, Mars is the 7th and 8th houses. So Mars is looking at the 7th house only. So Mars is not looking at the 8th house. Mars is looking at the 6th and the 7th houses. Saturn is looking at the 6th house, 12, 11, 10. And Saturn is looking at the 9th house. So we don't need to worry about it. And when you look at the Jupiter's direct aspect is on the 7th house and the 9th house. So no one is looking at the 8th house. So at this point, keep in mind, at this point, the 8th house is not at all afflicted. Only the 8th house Lord is in the 1st house. And the 4th house Lord is in the 8th house. And the 4th house Lord, Sun's Mahadasa is started. It's the balance period at the time of the birth. That's one of the reasons why the native's longevity is not problematic or is not worrisome, because the 8th house has nothing. 8th house Sun is not getting any malefic aspecting or anything like that. Some people say that Rahu in the who is residing in the 4th house, the 5th aspect is the 8th house, but I don't take Rahus. I take for Rahu and Ketu, I take only the 7th house aspect. That's the direct aspect. I don't consider any of the other aspects of Rahu and Ketu. So I'm not considering anything. This is the reason why you can say for one way or the other that the native was able to survive, be alive for a long period. That means the longevity of this native's way is high enough. No, it's not like there is no Balarishta too. So when you look at the exact date of birth, it's on January 8th, 1942. When I look at the Vimsottari Dasa, if you look at the whole Vimsottari Dasa, what you can see there is Sun Mahadasa, Saturn Antardasa, Mercury Antardasa, and Mars Sukshma Antardasa. So if you look at it, Saturn is in the 12th house owned by Mars, and that's where Mars is also residing. So the 12th house is fully afflicted. 12th house is hospitalizations. So this tells you that the native will be hospitalized very frequently, or the native will go to a place of cure, which is a doctor's office or a hospital or anything like that, very frequently, because at the time of birth